Hello, you're watching Avenue X, where junkie and good storytelling shares her thoughts, knowledge, and occasional weird ideas on stories and how they're told. And as you can tell, today I'm dressed up in the full-blown Song Dynasty style, making a video on the recently aired and still airing drama Meng Hua Lu, A Dream of Splendour. This is actually the part 1 of 2 videos in which I'm gonna talk about stuffs I've picked out of this drama that may be interesting to my international audiences. If the later episodes contain even more interesting things that I think is worth talking about, I could make further videos. In this video, we're gonna look at the title of this drama, the city that it's setting in history, and then the cultural and daily life routines and practices people had back then. Let's begin with the title of the drama, A Dream of Splendor in Chinese, Meng Hua Lu. Meng Hua Lu comes from Dongjing Meng Hua Lu, which is the title of a book written back then, close to 1,000 years ago. But before I go into explaining the title itself, I have to first explain Dongjing, the eastern capital. During Chinese ancient times, during different dynasties, some dynasties had multiple capitals. Song is one of them. At the time setting of this drama, which is at the beginning of the 11th century, Dongjing, the eastern capital, is the current Kaifeng city in the province Henan. So, as my clever audiences would guess, since there is an eastern capital, there must be a western capital. At the time, that would be Luoyang. If you've watched the Tang Dynasty setting drama, Wind Rises in Luoyang, or just Luoyang in English, you would know that is the Tang Dynasty eastern capital, because at that time, the more western capital of Tang Dynasty is Chang'an. Once we get to the North Song Dynasty, the western capital becomes Luoyang. Bianliang is to the east of Luoyang, therefore it is called eastern capital. It is also called Bianjing, means Bian, capital, and then often people at the time just call it Dongjing, eastern capital. These two characters, eastern capital, is the exact Chinese characters used today as the name of the Japan capital, Tokyo. Not to be confused as the same city, clearly. That is where our story is set for most of the episodes. Although at the beginning of the drama, our female lead character is from another place called Qiantang. This is the current Hangzhou, the city where Alibaba is based in. Hangzhou is about 900 kilometers to the southeast of Kaifeng. Now let's move back to talk about the title, Dongjing Meng Hua Lu, a record of dream and glory of the eastern capital. Since you already hear it's a journal and it's a record, so it's written by somebody who's lived there, and they're actually reminiscing the life there, because it's written by this person who has run away from the invasion from the north, as most of the Dongjing residents had done during the Jinkang Zhinan historical event. That is a huge scar on the Song Dynasty history, where 2 of the emperors of the Song Dynasty got abducted and moved to the north. Together with all the citizens of the city, the imperial family also escaped down south, and starting the second half of Song Dynasty, what we call today as South Song Dynasty. And this author, Meng Yuanlao, is one of those people who used to live in Dongjing during North Song Dynasty and had to give up everything he had, run away like hundreds and thousands of refugees down south. Once he got to south, he wrote this journal, reminiscing the life he had back in the days of the eastern capital, and that becomes a very important historical record, because in which he said a lot about city structure, each part, what is the function of them, what is the shops like, what kind of food was popular, what kind of cultural practices people had, holidays, celebrations, festivals, ceremonies of all kinds. The book was written at the beginning of 12th century and got passed down today. So a lot of the things you see in this drama are actually referenced to that journal. Since we're already talking about the eastern capital, you will see in this drama a lot of characters have mentioned it multiple times, commenting on how exciting nightlife is in eastern capital and how much of a commercial hub it is. And that is true. Back in North Song, it is one of the most vibrant cities in this world. And during certain period of Song Dynasty, this capital was actually completely curfew free. For a long time in Chinese ancient capitals, there's been reinforced curfews throughout different dynasties. For example, in Tang Dynasty, for a period of time, it was very strictly reinforced. Once the sun is down and the doors of each section is closed, if you get caught on the street walking around, you're gonna get thrown into jail. Towards the end of the dynasty, it started to loosen. Once we get to North Song, there were a couple of emperors who really want to reinforce that at the beginning, but then they couldn't quite do it. As time went by, it started to loosen up more and more. By the time that the record was written, which is 100 years later, as opposed to the time setting of our drama, it has completely given up the night curfew. Everybody can go on the street at night. People actually have all kinds of parties and nightlife throughout the whole night. Even though there's a kind of curfew, it only lasts a couple of hours and it reopens. If we're strict about historical record, at least with the time that this drama is setting at the beginning of the 11th century, there should still be some form of night curfew going on in the eastern capital, but 100 years later, it's almost not there anymore. Yet the drama definitely took the record that happened 100 years later and used it for this drama. Now we've talked extensively about the title and the city that the story is setting. Let's look at a couple of things throughout this drama that got represented on screen. Number one, you cannot ignore that this is a huge part of the drama, particularly around episode 16, with tea powder and pouring hot water into the rather big teacup and then beat it with this bamboo whisk that you've seen also in the drama 知否知否应是绿肥红瘦. A long time ago, I made a video talking about that. If you're curious about the details, you can go back to check that video. This type of beating the tea until it gets so foamy is the very popular way of drinking tea back in Song Dynasty. As time went on, it became less and less popular because it's super expensive to do. By Ming Dynasty, it finally got banned because the emperor thinks it just takes too much effort and money to produce, and it is way too extravagant to be a moral thing to be encouraged. And from that time onwards, now in China, the most common way of drinking tea is just brewing it with hot water. But in this drama's representation, they were correct about beating the tea until it gets a lot of foam. But when it comes to 斗茶, tea battle, what they will compete against each other is first, how fine and how thick your foam can be and how white it can be. The paler the color, the finer the foam, the better. Then, once you have the foam ready, you would put 2 teacups and let them rest there. See which one's foam disappears slower. The slower it is, the better it is. And that would also decide who wins the tea battle. So, in the drama's version, it should just be both Zhao Pan'er and the old gentleman got that tea. They compare, oh, all the colors are the same, it's same white, and it tastes good, and the foam is nice. Now let's just see which one's foam disappears first. That will be the loser. That is 斗茶. And it wouldn't include the second part where she starts to do drawings, because that's a different practice called 茶百戏. The literal meaning of the word 茶百戏 is tea 100, play. And when you do 茶百戏, you would also need to beat the tea, but you will use different amount of tea powder. You want the foam not to be white because you're gonna draw with water, which will create white. You want a dark background where your painting can show up. Therefore, you actually use a lot of tea powder. And you beat it until it becomes brown. You want a thick brown foam. Once you have that, you pour it into a big dish, like shown in the drama. And then you use clear water, either to dab and draw, like Zhao Pan'er did, or like the old gentleman, pouring water over it. Usually once you finish the drawing, it can last about 10 to 15 minutes before the foam disappears. So 茶百戏 is a different way of playing with the tea, and it's not necessarily 斗茶. And this drama, in this episode, mix these two things together, whereas in practice it would be different. But anyway, I'm still really appreciative of this drama to be able to show that extensively on screen. We've talked about tea, now let's talk about another thing that I noticed showing up in this drama that I find very interesting, which is pepper. During episode 19 and 20, when Gu Qianfen comes into Zhao Pan'er's home and she cooked something for him, and she was like, this is hard to come by and expensive. And if it's not you, I wouldn't put that much pepper in it, which is totally true because for a long time in China, pepper is super expensive. And also in history, if you research into that, a lot of spices were super expensive. Back in North Song Dynasty, China does grow pepper, but very limited. And along the very south of China, there are records saying they can only produce about less than 100 kilos for the entire country a year. And as you can imagine, that's not enough. So most pepper back then were imported. That's why it's super expensive. Now we've talked about food, let's talk about entertainment, clothing, and other things. First, clothing. In episode 17, you will hear Zhang Haohao looking at a piece of cloth that Yanei's people have managed to tear off the other group of people that they were having a fight on the street. And she said, wow, this is cotton. They must be really rich to be able to wear that. I don't see that many people have cotton clothes. I'm just so happy to see that happening in this drama. Cotton wasn't mass produced and widely used and becoming the cheapest fabric until Ming Dynasty in China. Before that, cotton was cultivated in China, but in very limited regions, therefore very low production, pretty much like pepper. And if you have cotton, that means you're super rich. We would have to wait till the end of Song and beginning of Yuan Dynasty to have important people showing up in Chinese history to further develop first growing cotton and also how to weave cotton fabric out of its original form. And that's another story, and including another significant, magnificent woman in Chinese history. It is true that back in the days of North Song, for the fabric of choice of commoners, it would just be fabric that comes from flax, linen, rough, but very durable, hard to shape, and very easy to crease. If you've used linen, you know what it's like. Then for the rich people, they will use silk. And that's pretty much what people had back then. So one of the notes that you can remember from this is if you're gonna time travel back to North Song and you want to be able to sell off everything you wear on your body once you get there to be able to survive, wear everything in cotton. Pure cotton will make you the richest person walking on the street. Then in terms of entertainment, if you've heard the sound of pipa playing, you know it's a very dominating instrument, and that's why it's one of the most important in a band back then. In the drama version, she plays a type of pipa that we would call today as nanyin pipa. It's very different from the typical pipa that people play today. The nanyin pipa is played horizontally and it has a curved neck, whereas the more common one that most pipa learner would go and learn first today is a pipa that's played this way, vertically, straight neck, and having a lot more levels of the fingerboard that you can see along its neck. So it's a later version of pipa. The particular instrument pipa had over 2,000 years history in China, and it developed slowly over time. During Tang Dynasty, it became one of the most dominant instrument played then. But then it was played this way. The earliest way that you can find that's actually made into a clay doll out of a tomb that people discovered, the lady was holding it this way, which is tilting the neck down towards the ground. I don't know how you can do it, but that's how it's played. Gradually, it became horizontal. People were playing it like that. And then it started to get up until now, modern pipa is completely played vertical. Very interesting, isn't it? When it was played that way, the most common way was playing it with a pick. A little bit like guitar, but much bigger. It looks like a spatula that you used for cooking today to pick the strings. And it will give it a sharper, more clear sound because it was wood on string. Later, the skills start to develop where people start to play it with fingers. And it gives it more possibility in terms of how fast you can go and how many different variations you can do. But the sound will become more muffled. In this drama, you will see Song Yizhang playing it actually with both ways, fingers and the pick. That is also very accurate because towards the end of Tang Dynasty, people start to play with fingers and it gradually developed into more fingers than pick and eventually almost completely with fingers. If you want to know more about pipa, just look at Two Set Violins videos. I believe they did do a video specifically on this instrument, and in the video you can see in detail about how this instrument gets played. Now we're at the end of the first part of my two-part video, and I'm gonna conclude that with a symbolism thing in this drama. After our lady won the tea battle, she started dancing at night, and our main male lead comes in, blown away by how beautiful she is, and he promised her to marry her. At that point of the drama, he picked a branch of flower and gave that to her, and basically saying, this is my promise to you. And she's very happy to take the flower. That flower is a pomegranate flower, often for a woman's skirt. In Chinese culture, it's called 石榴裙. So there is a saying of 拜倒在 somebody's 石榴裙下, which means you bow down under someone's pomegranate skirt. That's one common expression. Also, pomegranate, the fruit, is what? Multiple seeded. It has hundreds and thousands of seeds in a big fruit. So it represents fertility. The burning red color that declares passion, and its following fruit that declares children. Important for ancient people for sure. And that should conclude the first part of my two videos on the Dream of Splendour's cultural literature, all kinds of references that shows up in a drama that I find interesting and probably will make you find it interesting too. Thank you for watching Avenue X. I'll see you in my next video. Meanwhile, live long and happy drama watching and happy dreaming.